Thank you very much. Well,
Ready.
okay. On behalf of the Sharon Historical Society, a warm welcome to a man who has spent much of his life from childhood on in Sharon. And for somebody who wanted to be a country lawyer, went on to serve his country as a Navy officer in World War II in the Pacific, a United States Senator, an Undersecretary of State, and a federal appellate judge in the DC Circuit. James Buckley, thank you so much. How does one refer to somebody who's had all those positions? Judge, senator?
That's Jim. How's it?
Jim Buckley, thank you so much for being here. And as we speak, you've just turned 98 years old and gone through a successful hip surgery. How are you feeling?
So far, okay. I'm on the right course. It takes time for the muscles to rediscover what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But I'll be getting there.
And of course, you are also an esteemed member of our Historical Society in Sharon. Let me start by asking you, how did the Buckley family come to be in Sharon?
It's total oddity. My father was a Texan, South Texas, grew up in a small town there. My mother's from New Orleans. My father fell in love with Mexico, became a lawyer, went to Mexico. Oil was discovered, and he became a lawyer for the oil companies and focused on the land end of the oil business. My father also is a person of opinions, which he expressed freely, with the result that in time he was expelled from Mexico. But by that time he had created the company, was involved in this area of the oil business. And there he was, newly married, although he was in his late 30s by then. What do you do? He spoke Spanish. Oil was discovered in Venezuela. But if you're going to put the pieces together, you need something called money. Where is money? Wall Street. So my southern parents suddenly found themselves in New York City. In due course, I was born there, the fourth of 10 children. And in my third month, they had the good sense to move to Sharon, Connecticut. And that is where Sharon came into my heart, where it still is.
That's so wonderful to hear. Tell me your remembrances of being a child in Sharon. What was that like?
Could you say that again, please?
What was it like to grow up in Sharon, to be a child? What was childhood like?
Well, best I can do is talk about being a teenager in Sharon in the 1930s. That is some time ago. By that time, Sharon had shrunk to, I think, about 1,800 people in 80 square miles, 60 square miles. But the peculiar thing about Sharon in those days was it was divided into very different groups. There were, quotes, the natives, people who worked there, who farmed and all the rest of it, and the summer people. The summer people consisted of about 20 or 30 New York City families who, after schools closed in New York City, would move the entire household into one of the nice houses on South Main Street and so forth in Sharon, where they'd spend lovely summers, and then after Labor Day, they would disappear. For whatever reason, although the Buckleys were in Sharon 12 months a year, I was educated in private schools the way the summer people were. And so in effect, I grew up with the summer people, although I was an honorary native. The summer people had their own social life and so forth. They had the Sharon Country Club, and take it from there. But it does say things about Sharon itself. Why were there so many New York families doing this? And I think that to get the answer to that, you have to go back to Sharon's particular history. Unlike most of the towns in that general area in Litchfield County and so forth, Sharon was not settled by people who wanted to farm. There are people, they were drawn there because of the discovery of iron ore in around 1700 and so on, iron ore along the border between Connecticut and New York. This drew entrepreneurs into Sharon Valley, where there's for many years, for over 100 some odd years, lively manufacturing. The oh, I forget the name. Anyways, some important inventions were made there. They made mouse traps. They also made explosive shells for for the Civil War and so on. But you had a group of prosperous people who built nice homes in Sharon. And then by the end of the 1800s, the iron played out. All of those little industries kind of died away. And there was Sharon sitting as an immaculate, pristine New England town with an inventory of nice houses that was beyond commuting distance from anywhere, therefore couldn't be spoiled by all kinds of new housing developments, etc. And that, for whatever reason, seemed to draw this category of New Yorkers. And in those days, no weekenders. I never heard of it. Didn't know any weekenders. They were all the summer people who became part of Sharon in their own way and had their impact on Sharon. One interesting impact had to do with the fact that about 5 or 6 of the doctors, of the New York doctors with homes in Sharon, were very prominent in their professions while in New York. And during the early 70s, the early 30s, this Sharon doctor, I forget what his name was, felt the need for kind of a nursing home. He was able to talk it up with the New Yorkers who provided the backing, whatever it was they required. They gave us what is now Sharon Hospital.
Yeah. And what's your memory of what did the town look like as a teenager in the 1930s? It looks different than it is now?
The significant difference between the Sharon I grew up in, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, and what we have today is no elm trees.
No.
The Sharon Green was surrounded with 2 columns of magnificent elms. They got destroyed when the Dutch elm disease went through there. But the buildings were almost identical. Some of them had painted different colors, but that's about visually, that is about the only change. And that's part of the charm that has brought people to Sharon.
What did you and your brothers and sisters do to pass the hours during the summer? What did you do to get in trouble?
Well, I started off by saying there were 10 of us. And we made all kinds of trouble within the 10 of us. Unfortunately, we had sort of a mischief streak that bothered some of the neighbors, I must confess. But we, you do what kids do in the country. You climb trees and things that children aren't allowed to do anymore. But we were with the children of the summer people, and 2 of the fathers organized Saturday morning baseball games on the property of the older of 2 Dr. Coleys, on the property just to the borders on the town clock. And there we had the dirty shirts versus my memory. Anyway, we had the kind of fun the kids have. We had ponies, which we rode around on. We learned to, in season, to ice skate and things of that sort. It was a healthy, plain country existence.
And in that town, during the time you were a child, do you recall, were there any big fires, big storms, big calamities?
Did you remember any storms? Yes, we had in 1938 a horrendous storm that blew down trees all the way up as far as Sharon and beyond. It was impossible to drive to Armenia, New York from Sharon for about 3 days because that was all floodwater. Yes, we had a regular time, and the winters were a lot more brutal than they have been in recent years. It was not unusual to have 15, 20 degrees below zero. And lots of snow. Yeah. And we naturally did what people do when there's snow, sleds, and things of that sort. But anyway, it was a normal child's existence.
And at the time you were growing up, did you have the appreciation that you were a privileged family?
I guess we did, yes, yeah. There's no
And,
doubt about that.
and who were some of your close friends? Some of the other families you can recall back then?
Well, my closest friend was a fellow called Dean Witt, whose father, incidentally, was a New York doctor. And they built a house up in Sharon Mountain. Bill Coley, the son and grandson of other doctors. John Emery, Phil Truax, a nice group of kids that we got along well. And the one thing that distinguished my particular group, none of them ever smoked. And with the result is I never smoked and never put to that temptation. And of course, in those days, things like pot were totally unknown.
You went off to war to serve the country in the U.S. Navy. Were others in Sharon also going off to war? Do you recall those times?
Well, after Pearl Harbor, people my age had no doubt whatsoever as to what they would be doing next. They didn't have to worry about, are you going to be an engineer, or are you going to be a doctor, or whatever. You were either drafted or you signed on the line, and I signed for the Navy. And so I ended up in the Pacific on an LSC.
And when you came back home, it was back to school and to Sharon?
Well, I came back, I had graduated from college. At the Pearl Harbor, I signed up with the Navy program, and the college itself accelerated. So I actually got my degree, although in my last semester, I was in a Navy uniform. So that was behind me. And then I decided, when floating around the Pacific, that what did I want to do with my life? And it was to be a country lawyer in Sharon, Connecticut. So I went to law school at Yale, and then things did not work out quite the way I had planned.
In your book, you called it unplanned life. You were happy just letting things take their own course?
Well, there were interventions here and there. The first one was I went to work with a New Haven law firm to get the credentials that would enable me to then open an office in Sharon and present myself as somebody who is not totally green in legal matters. But I got persuaded by my brother John to join my family's business, which had to do with working with small oil companies looking for oil outside the United States. So I spent the next 17 years as a businessman, and but with 4 days in New York City and 3 days in Sharon, Connecticut, so I'm happy to say. So that connection was never severed. And then strange things happened. I had an exotic brother called Bill, who managed to turn parts of the world upside down. And he decided to run for mayor of New York City in order to, as the candidate of New York's conservative party, to point out how sound government would really handle a great big metropolis, as opposed to what the Republican and Democratic candidates would do. He asked me to be his campaign manager. I knew nothing about politics, but he wanted to have a buffer between himself and the eager beggars of the Conservative Party that wanted to occupy too much of his time. And in due course, somebody 2 years later suggested that I run for the Senate of the United States. So that's how I got into politics.
And tell me about that race.
That was against a fellow called Jacob Javits, utterly unbeatable. The Conservative Party was able to raise $180,000 for a statewide race, but for peculiar reasons, and because I had access to all of the debates and so forth, I ended up with 17% of the vote. And then by this time, students were burning flags and all kinds of other things that happened in the late 60s. And 2 years later, I decided, I call it my Boy Scout impulse, to say, well, maybe I should try to seriously run for the Senate. And I was able to get the support I needed, and I won in a three-way race.
And that was you made history when you did that. And what was it like? The young man from Sharon who wanted to be a country lawyer ended up in the as one of the 100 most powerful men or women in this.
A different landscape, yes.
And then you also ran for the Senate in Connecticut.
I did. I was rejected by New York voters after 6 years. And I had some things I wanted to finish that I had started. So I ran in Connecticut, and that did not work.
And at this time, you continued to come back to Sharon. You were one of the weekenders then, right?
I was one of the weekenders, right? And that was a new phenomenon. They did not exist. I can't think of a single friend I had in Sharon growing up that was a weekender.
And what was the town like as it came through World War II, post-war, Kennedy administration, Lyndon Johnson?
Much the same. People changed, and some businesses were formed. Others went out of business. There was no longer a blacksmith to make shoes for your pony, things of that sort. The character of the town was pretty much the same.
And throughout this time, you remained active in politics, as did other members of your family. Tell me about some of them and their lives in Sharon.
Well, they were all bright, interesting people. The oldest one of us was my sister Eloise, who is a mother of 10 herself. But she did a lot of writing, a beautiful writer and so forth. She wrote articles and so on. Brother John was in the family business and stayed with it. He also made sure that the ruffed grouse population in Northwest Connecticut was kept in the proper balance. My sister Priscilla next became managing editor of National Review, was a journalist and a top person. Your servant, Jane, who lived in Sharon, who raised her kids there. Brother Bill, Patricia, who is an editor for a publisher. A lot of writing in the family. Brother Reed, who wrote a bunch of novels and so on. And then two sisters, Maureen and Carol.
During the Reagan administration, you served as an Undersecretary of State. To what extent did your upbringing in Sharon shape your values as you approached that position?
My upbringing in Sharon taught me the wonders of the American Constitution, the way governmental powers were distributed by the Constitution, the wonders performed by the American experiment, and the importance of preserving its fundamentals intact. How did that apply in foreign policy? Totally different set of problems.
You're one of the few men.
I was never embarrassed about talking about American values.
You're one of the few people who served in such senior positions in all three branches of government, in the judiciary, in Congress, and in the executive branch. That's quite an accomplishment.
Well, according to Wiki's wiki, whatever. There were 46 of us.
Which of those positions did you enjoy the most?
If your basic interest is in matters of public policy, there could not have been a finer job than to have been a United States Senator in the 50, 100 years ago, when the federal government was limiting itself to those areas assigned to it by the Constitution. But it was the volume of things taken on by Congress these days, the splintering of interests, make it terribly hard a job to focus on those things you wanted to get done, focus how to get there, and so on. So I had decided that had I had a second term, that would have been it.
With your brother Bill and your sister Priscilla and yourself, you really helped shape the future of the Republican Party. Is that fair to say?
And that's the phrase is conservative movement, which is distinct from the conservative Republican Party. In the days that I was in the Senate, which I think was true of most of American history, you didn't have one Republican Party, you had 50 Republican parties. Each state had its own kind of approaches and so forth, which gave you a lot of flexibility to argue around and persuade and so forth. I voted more often with Southern Democrats than I did for Northeastern Republicans, most often for Midwestern. Why Southern Democrats? Because of the limitations on the spread of the federal authority, the states' rights, in other words.
And Sharon was one of the birthplaces of the modern conservative movement that helped form a movement to bring Ronald Reagan into office. Is that fair to say?
I'm afraid I didn't quite catch you there.
There was a gathering in Sharon where the conservatives sort of decided what was needed to seek power. Yes, tell me about that.
Yeah, there was a youth movement that Brother Bill kind of launched. And there was a great big meeting, and there's something called the Sharon Statement, setting out a set of principles. And if you are interested, if you're in Sharon and are interested in the Sharon Statement, you can go on the property dividing Great Elm from the property next to it, and there's a great big bronze plaque, and you can satisfy your historic interest.
And that was a pivotal moment in American politics, wasn't it?
Well, at the time, it was interesting and not insignificant.
Was there any point where you thought, maybe I'll go back and become a country lawyer in Sharon, or that ship had sailed?
That kind of escaped me, sort of.
And then your appointment to the judiciary. Did you continue to come to Sharon during those times?
I would weekends. Yeah, no. I was working in Washington, and my kids, would be in Sharon. Yeah.
And in those times, what have you seen in terms of the character of Sharon, to the extent that it has changed, that you appreciate or that you don't think is so good?
Say that again, please.
What sort of changes have there been in the character of the town of Sharon in the last 20, 30 years that you like and that you don't necessarily appreciate?
Yes. When I was growing up, it was a farming community. I think there were 40 dairies. Somebody told me there's only one or two of them now. All kinds of areas that were, growing corn or used as pasture, and now growing into second growth. And suddenly little houses are popping up here and there in the Sharon Mountain. And are there other ways in which it's changed? Well, the development of the Sharon Hospital and it moved to the concentration on the area of medicine. That's a very significant change in the character of the town.
And how about your own family? You and your wife raised children in Sharon. How was that? How was their childhood different than what you had in Sharon?
Not that much different. We didn't have as many brothers and sisters to play with. Only six.
Only six.
But they've touched baseball, football, wandering around the landscape. They also went to private schools. They were members of the Sharon Country Club.
Right. Are there aspects of Sharon that you have seen disappear in addition of farming for the most part, but not altogether?
I'd say the farming was a significant factor. I remember the milk truck after milk truck after milk truck coming down from Ellsworth back in the old days.
What were some of the
You had people also on Mudge Pond sawing ice, big blocks of ice, and I recall the iceman bringing blocks of ice for the ice box in our kitchen.
Oh my goodness.
Times have changed in that respect.
And was there a milkman who came around with?
The milkman came around, yeah. But actually, we had our own cow.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And were you one of those who had to milk the cow?
My sister Eloise mastered that art.
Did the cow have a name?
I'm sure she did.
Were there any aspects about Sharon that were less than favorable as you were growing up? Some have talked about religious bias and unwelcoming to certain faiths.
Well, I was a Catholic, and the Southern Catholic family sort of moved in. We were sort of oddities in that respect, but nothing that would bother me.
Yeah, not an issue.
I never felt biased.
And you were a member of St. Bernard's for quite a while, right?
Yeah, very definitely.
Yeah.
Until 2 years ago.
As a part of the Sharon Historical Society, it's been our wonderful task to talk to people who have lived here over the years. Any other memories you want to sort of for posterity for us to think about, and what should people who are coming to Sharon now and are new to the town, what should they know about Sharon that would keep the character the same?
Yeah, I just know. I haven't focused on it anyway.
But were there any when you left?
There,
yeah.
Whom I missed.
Yeah.
Whom I missed.
And when you left, would you have any concerns about the growth? What might become that would not be so wonderful?
That's my great fear. No. Throw in big shopping malls or something of that sort. Large housing developments, the character of the place inherently changes. Right now, it is a little piece from the past. Now I know that sentiment of that sort shouldn't control, but I'm glad it's still the way it is.
Yeah. And was it difficult decision to leave Sharon?
It was a necessary decision. Yeah. My nearest child was 3.5 hours away. I could no longer drive. My wife had died, and I have a lovely son who lives in Virginia, and so I'm happy here.
That's excellent. And your health is amazing. You went through a hip surgery at an advanced age.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Still getting around okay?
No.
All right. Well, Judge, Jim, is there anything else you'd like to add? This is fascinating to hear you describe Sharon as you knew it and as you grew up. I guess are there any other sort of bumps in the road for Sharon that they were able to overcome?
Let me say this. If you were highly social, loved dances and things, Sharon might not be the place to grow up. And I know I had one brother who in that, and I had one son in that general category. But if you love to walk in the woods, if you love to hunt and fish, if you like to climb trees, I can't think of a better place.
Well, Jim Buckley, thank you so much for your time, and it's our great honor to have you talk for the Historical Society with your remembrances of our town.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jim.
Brian,
Yes.
there just one other, David sent me a little note saying that there was a famous neighbor across the street, Audrey Meadows of Honeymooner fame, and her
Oh,
dad.
sure. Steve Allen, yeah.
She and I duetted together in my youth.
Start again, to tell me again.
Audrey Cotter was her real name, but her mother's name was Meadows. Audrey Meadows and I duetted singing. I was a soprano at the time. That was when I was probably 12 years old, 13 years old. Yeah, so that's my memory of Audrey.
And where did you sing?
I forget.
Was it was there a Sharon Playhouse then?
No.
No.
No Playhouse. No.
Other than the Buckleys, the most famous family in Sharon, who else of celebrity or notoriety do you recall living in Sharon?
There's a fellow called Admiral Hart. Does that ring a bell with you?
Of course, he was your commanding officer, wasn't he?
He's my commanding officer. No, lovely man. Of course, he retired. He was, at the time of Pearl Harbor, he was the oldest admiral in the world's navies. And he was able to make it all the way by submarine to Australia and retired, and then was appointed senator from Connecticut.
Huh.
Filled a vacancy.
It's surprising the number of people who have gone on to great prominence from our small town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something about the value of a small town and the virtues. And, yeah.
Except that he didn't grow up in Sharon.
Right. So he came back to Sharon. All right, Jim. That's fascinating. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And David, thank you for helping set it up.
My pleasure, Brian.
It's a great honor to talk to you, Jim. And
David, this was really fantastic. I hope we didn't miss anything. Is there anything else on your list?
I can't think of anything. I thought it was fascinating.
It was a great interview. I wonder, since you've proven yourself to be so technically adept, do you think you could get a picture of Dad maybe reading a book or looking at some papers on his desk with that camera, just so we have one other introductory shot? Would you mind trying?
Okay.
all right.
Brian, you can hang up. We'll just let David just use just something steady. You don't need to do any fancy moves, but just film about 20, 30 seconds of something.
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, David.
Good seeing you. Take care now.
Okay.
All right.
There we go.
Okay.
Oh, they have to
Oh,
unhook Father.
Yeah.
All right.
Whatever you think looks good, David. You've seen enough documentaries. Just the classic is pretending to read a book or write a letter or something, and just hold. The trick is just to get us a long length shot that's steady, like 20, 30 seconds with a wide shot. And if it looks good to you, it'll look good to us. It'll be a little extra bonus.
Okay.
And if you want me to stop the Zoom, I probably will do that too. Well, I'll keep it open so we can communicate.
Got it.
What am I supposed to be doing?
You're supposed to be, let's see.
I don't know, write a letter or write something or look at something, read a book.
Okay, if I can find a pen.
Read a book.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Let's see. I gotta do this. Okay. Try something over here. No, that's not gonna work because I can do it. There we go. Going back over here. And maybe I'll try another shot from.
Sure. And then maybe Judge would like to put on his glasses and read something. Maybe that's easier to see his face a little bit. But
Yeah.
whatever. Take as many shots as you want. This is no longer film. The electronic We got, it never runs out, really.
Okay.
I got a friend that dug out, but with a historic
Mhm.
error. That's the word that I didn't think of earlier.
Ah, yes, the Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Okay.
And I had the list.
So who is the most recent member of your 3-branch club?
I don't know.